Mental Health Awareness Week last week. So, of course, we did a live stream specifically for that. So today, back on the technology, and we'll be talking all about application insights and the tool you never knew that you needed. So I'm very pleased to say that we got a guest returning to us today, Isaac Levin. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and bring Isaac onto the show. Hey, Isaac. Good evening. Good morning.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Let me fix my little thing. It looks like it's backwards. There we go. Much better.
Aha, there we go.
Alrighty. Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, just toggle box to make things so much better. Yeah, so I mean, App Insights, right? Super exciting. I know that a lot of people have probably heard about it. Maybe some folks have had the opportunity to play around with it. And I think that it's one of those things that's inside of Azure that people commonly overlook or maybe don't think that it's super valuable, especially if they're developers. And I've been beating the drum for a long time. Like App Insights is probably, actually, no, I'm not going to say probably, it is my favorite service inside of Azure.
Wow.
And I love talking about it. And I'm super excited to get an opportunity to chat with you again because you're lovely. But as well, just getting to talk about things that I love on side of the Azure platform.
Awesome. And big bold statement there saying App Insights is
Yeah,
the favorite service there. But I agree.
my favorite. I can't speak for everybody, but as
Well,
somebody um who gets value out of understanding what their apps are doing, I think App Insights is just one of those things that's kind of utter perfection, right? It
absolutely.
gives you the opportunity to easily instrument your code to understand what your code is doing. It's not just about, oh, I can see when exceptions are happening. I think that's one of the like main pillars of it, but there's definitely so much more that you can do to it, like around tracking users and tracking flow of users and understanding performance and just getting a better insight into trends, right?
Absolutely.
um yeah, so excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. And I think there's been a few topics as well on the show that I've talked about recently around things like gaming, how gaming is becoming more of a service, for example. And
Hmm.
when you think
Sure.
about a load of the technologies Microsoft makes, like Azure DevOps and Office 365, they were almost these boxed products that have evolved into services as well. And I think for something like App Insights or even loads of organizations that'll be going on their cloud journey, those few nuggets of information that you mentioned there about what users are doing, being able to get that telemetry and understand, is the user clicking on this button, do they actually like this
Yeah.
feature versus another feature, is so pivotal because we're now in this world. It fits as part of this DevOps story, right? That you have this agile way of working. You can go from sprint to sprint and figure out, right, what are the things that our users really interacted with, what did they enjoy, where were the biggest problem areas for our application. And ultimately, as end users, we kind of look at it as, if you're not fixing the stuff that's broke or the stuff that
Sure.
we're not really interacting with, why am I going to bother using your application? And I think that's where the value of something like this comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? And you mentioned something that's super like on the nose, right? This like DevOps, right? I think more and more you see now telemetry and this concept of live ops or this concept of telemetry ops, basically seeing telemetry as a part of your DevOps workflow at the tail end,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your SDLC or your DevOps journey doesn't stop once your app is in production, right? Like it then feeds back into the tail, right? You get great insights and telemetry from an App Insights or some of the other tools out there that do similar things. And then it starts the process over again, where it kicks off development streams and all that sort of great stuff, right? And one thing is super important too. It's like even though it's a very ops specific service, I think everybody in the technology chain, even outside of technology, can take advantage of it, right? Like developers, obviously, because it allows them to better triage issues because you can see like maybe I'll show you a demo of like how easy it is to triage issues with App
Mm.
Insights. But for like your business decision makers or in technical decision makers, you know, is it worth the investment to bring in a particular feature or do something, when you can actually look at your user flows and say, oh, well, users don't actually go down that path in your application for whatever reason, right? So it's extremely helpful to understand, like, oh, why aren't people signing up for my new thing? Well, it's 4 clicks into an app. Like that's bad user experience, and then you can have kind of a repositioning of how you want to make sure that investment that you're doing is getting all of the eyes as possible, right? So these are things that you can do with App Insights. Like it's not just, it is 1 click and it's there, but then there's all these learnings that you can take advantage of. And it's one of those things where there's always something new that you find out when you start looking at the telemetry of your applications.
Absolutely. And I think you set the scene originally, right? Is it's not just about
Sure.
exceptions and things like that. And completely agree with you. It's about your user flows, how they're going through the application, and you can ultimately take it to the business level, right? And instrument your application to have certain events being raised, for example. So how many times are people going ahead and running through this process? How many times are they getting halfway through that process and actually encountering a failure? Or, it might not be an exception, it might be more of a business process failure, right? And
Sure.
there's loads of different ways that we can go and interact with that. So I think maybe let's start getting a bit hands-on and diving into things is probably a good way to go here. So let me
Yeah.
bring up the screen share here.
Sure. So let me just do a couple of things really quick and to set the stage, right? So I think one of the things let me just share my screen. It looks like you're looking at an old version of it. Oh, wrong monitor. Hold on.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So yeah, we're good. We should be good. So one thing that's really, really valuable about App Insights. So maybe just a little bit of backstory as I'm kind of setting the stage here about what App Insights is as it pertains to what it means in the whole Azure story, right? So Application Insights, for the folks who don't know, it's the application instrumentation piece of Azure Monitor, which is the larger, I guess, holistic monitoring service that exists inside of Azure. So Azure Monitor does things like you can monitor VMs, you can monitor clusters inside of Kubernetes and all sorts of different things. And for app-specific telemetry being just the data that your app produces as it goes about its business, for that app telemetry, it uses a service called App Insights, which used to be its own standalone service, but now it's actually rolled into the Azure Monitor, I guess, family of services. And one thing that's really, really cool about App Insights is there's a couple of different ways that you can instrument your app, right? For your typical .NET developer or Node.js developer, Java developer, it's as easy as instantiating and installing an SDK in your application if you have the ability to do that. If you don't, if you just have code that's deployed somewhere, you can actually instrument the app, whether it's on-premise or it's inside of Azure. So if you use App Service, for instance, it's a couple of button clicks. If you have an on-premise VM or a VM in Azure that has your apps that's IIS, that runs on IIS, it's as simple as running a PowerShell commandlet to instrument it. And I want to show you really how easy it is to take an app, a .NET app, .NET 5 app inside of Visual Studio 2019 and instrument it.
Nice.
So I have this app here. A lot of folks have probably seen it before. It's called eShop on Web. It's kind of like the de facto large project for e-commerce that Microsoft has built. I don't remember what team actually built it, but it's used by internal folks at Microsoft. We use it sometimes to promote our events. And I like it just because there's a lot of projects here, and it kind of shows you it's not just like one project and then whatever.
Sure.
So lighting up App Insights is super, super easy. And what I mean super, super easy is literal as you take a web project, for instance, as you can see, .NET 5, Web SDK, I right click on this, and then I can configure Application Insights. So Application Insights, like I said, it's a service that you create inside of Azure. So when the first thing you see when you right click that is it says, how do you want to configure the service dependency for this project? So you can install the App Insights SDK locally, which that just basically allows you to get a feel for how App Insights works and some of the telemetry that you're going to see for your app. Or you can go straight away and connect it to an existing App Insights resource in Azure or create a new one. So I can actually just click local here. So I just want to show you what actually happens. So, project changes for your dependencies. So you can actually take a look at the NuGet packages that you're bringing in, as well as track changes for your code. You click finish. And what this thing does here is this basically installs a handful of NuGet packages into your app. And then it does a little bit of code instrumentation. And I'll show you what that looks like after Visual Studio configures all these things. But basically, the long and short of it is that Application Insights uses what's called an instrumentation key. And that's how that's your relationship as an application to it running in Azure. So what that means is that your instrumentation key is like it's a GUID or GUID that allows you to have like that identification for your particular instrument. And Visual Studio is hanging a little bit, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about that. So, yeah. So when I mentioned for it's not just .NET. Like I love .NET as an example because I'm a .NET developer. It's what I'm most comfortable in. But there's existing App Insights SDKs for Java, Node.js, vanilla JavaScript, Ruby, Python, PHP, I believe. And you can also you can just you can create the instrumentations yourself because there's a pretty good documentation set on how to just light up the services and call into them, because that's all App Insights is. It's the service that exists inside of Azure, right? So you can call it over a REST endpoint. I'm going to see if I can get Visual Studio to move along. Let's do that. So a couple of things that it says that it's configured here. If I take a look, let's just look at my Git changes here and see what it actually did. So as you can see, it did a couple of things here. It made some modifications to my startup CS project. Let me just zoom in. Maybe not zoom in. Control 1, there you go. So it made some changes to startup CS, and it made some changes to my web project. So if I go into my web project and see what it did, all it did is it added, scroll up here. Where is that? Let me just search for where it actually, there we go. So as you can see, so it's the App Insights ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET Core SDK, which is a NuGet package, and then it makes and then it lights it up using dependency injection. So it adds an extra extension method inside of startup, inside of your configure services for add application insights telemetry. And that's all it really does. So if I was to start this application, which I guess I could try to do, I haven't actually opened this in a bit, so it might just fail miserably, but let's just click and see what happens. So since I configured it, what I should be able to see here after my application starts is I should start to see telemetry actually being created for my local session. And that can give me an idea of what App Insights is actually doing when you instrument and you have it running on your services in production or different environments.
Gotcha. And I think this is, again, just to really pull it out for anyone who's listening in here, App Insights, everything we're looking at here, you don't need to have your application hosted in Azure. It could be on-prem, it could be in another cloud, it could be in Azure, and that's absolutely fine. But all of this instrumentation is done, at least from the .NET side, what we're seeing here, is instrumented inside of the application and being sent to Azure. So the destination of those telemetry and the metrics and whatnot being sent up is Azure, but the application itself could be anywhere, effectively.
Yeah, no, and that's completely right. I think so as you can see, the app is running, right? So I think that's really, really important to call. So this app is actually running, and I can actually go into my output window. Just make this a bit bigger. That didn't work what I wanted it to do. All right, let's just close all this stuff. All right, so what you'll see here is it starts to send out these requests, and these are kind of hard to read right here, but I'll show you an easier way. So it says, application insights telemetry unconfigured because I haven't configured it to run in Azure yet, but it actually starts to log things. And I can actually go into an application insights search pane inside of Visual Studio and search my debug session. So I can actually look at data over the last 30 minutes, for instance, and it'll actually start to show me, this is for my debugging session. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, let's just minimize, let's just pin this stuff, right? So if I, for instance, click on like add to basket, right? Like, and I click around and do these different things, like telemetry will start to update in here. So as you can see, it says update 51 new, right? So super, super cool. Like all I did is I just clicked a couple of buttons inside of Visual Studio and I can see requests coming through. I can see metrics being tracked, page views, so forth, right? Like super, super cool. And I didn't really even do anything. You can then extend application insights with code to track individual events. Like maybe, for instance, every time somebody adds something to the cart in this particular sense, maybe I want to light that up. And you can actually easily do that using using a couple of extension methods, which is right from C# right there. So super, super cool. I mean, you can't get much easier than that from going from not knowing what your application is doing from a telemetry standpoint to, having, it's been running, I haven't done anything, and there's already like 90, right?
Absolutely.
So super valuable.
Absolutely. And I think that's it, right? Is even if you do nothing else, you're already getting a ton of value there in terms of, what requests are coming through from the application and exception tracing and all of these other things which will get logged out. But there's so much more that can be done as well. And, we don't have to necessarily show it all here. But
Sure.
as you say, if we start adding in the traces, for example, of what different stages through our APIs, for example, and saying, right, we've gone ahead and called this API with this correlation ID, for example, and all of these kind of things. This is where App Insights can get super, super powerful, because you don't just have to have one application mapping to one App Insights resource. You can do that. You could have multiple. And then ultimately what App Insights can do, even across these different resources, is start stitching some of these different things together. And I'm trying to get it working on my other screen here. Unfortunately, I deleted one of the core components that I would have needed for a demo like this. Sod's law, right? But what you can do is you could have like your client front-end application, whether it's like a JavaScript app, like I saw you had Blazor there running a moment ago, or Vue or something else, sending the telemetry off to App Insights, one resource, and then you could have all of your APIs, whether it's Azure Functions or whatever else it's kind of being hosted on there, sending it to other App Insights resources. And one of the great things you can do is stitch all of that together. So you can get this end-to-end view as like a map, effectively, of that infrastructure. So what calls are happening from your clients to your APIs, maybe to API management in the middle, for example, and be able to start getting this really rich view of what requests are going where are maybe some of those painful points as part of the application, where there's pinch points or bottlenecks, for example, because the requests are taking a large amount of time, and effectively get this overall dependency map then between these different distributed components. And you can get some really clever things coming out of App Insights there if you can spend the time and a bit of love around it as well.
Yeah, I think that's 100% on point with what I want. Just like, I think there's like two extremely important things to call out about App Insights, right? Like one, it's very, very easy to light up and start to just get initial telemetry, production of your applications. And then the second thing, which I think is even more exciting, is, what you do with this data, right? Like taking advantage of the data, looking at some of the different slices and metrics inside of the Azure portal. Those things are super exciting and super impactful, and allows you to do all sorts of really, really fun things. It's important to call out too, is that Microsoft is making making huge strides in trying to make the idea of telemetry generation de facto standard across the industry. So we're working with the Open Telemetry Collective to be able to have a standardized approach and schema for our telemetry across things. So there's other companies. I highly recommend folks go and check out the Open Telemetry Initiative. Google is a part of that. Other large organizations that aren't directly aligned with cloud providers are in there. Like I have friends that work at Zillow, for instance. Zillow is a huge proponent of the open telemetry space. I hope I just didn't get in trouble for saying that. But anyway, I think the biggest thing to call out is it's about making the barrier to entry for telemetry consumption as low as possible, right? Because it's, like I said earlier, it's something that everybody can take full advantage of.
Gotcha. No, complete sense. And I think we've obviously focused on the .NET angle here as well, but
Mhm.
there's obviously numerous languages and frameworks out there, and again, App Insights isn't just the Microsoft kind of telemetry tool, or putting it that way.
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
frameworks out there and plugins for things like Java. Kubernetes has even a different way of doing it, for example, with Java, that you don't even need to have the app configured or instrumented, I should say, with the telemetry. There's a way that you can run it as a sidecar, I think, with App Insights and have it
Mhm.
almost as a agentless, or I can't remember exactly how they do it. But again, there's different ways depending upon the technology that you can bring that in as well. So um, just keep the options open, I guess, is what I'm getting at there. If you're listening in here and thinking I don't have a .NET app, that's absolutely fine. .NET is obviously one technology choice, and there's many others out there, and App Insights will work great with those as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. There used to be a GitHub repository which listed all of the SDKs right there.
Mm,
Um, I'm not able to find that GitHub repository any longer. But for instance, I just did a Google search for App Insights SDK, and I'm seeing ones for Node.js and Java, iOS, which is in beta,
mm,
WordPress. If you have a WordPress site, you can actually light up App Insights to it. It's just one of those things where I think, yeah, sure, like it plays great with .NET, and I showed a .NET example because that's my particular use case.
mm,
But JavaScript, like it's not just JavaScript, right? Like it's every JavaScript framework.
yeah,
So every JavaScript framework has like Angular has an npm package, React has one, Vue has one, Node.js has like its own particular way to instrument too because it runs on the server. Like again, like it's not just .NET. It's basically anything, and it's not just web either. That's something really important to call out too. Like there are existing packages and extensions for App Insights that can allow you to collect telemetry on client apps as well. Like I was talking to you a little bit earlier before we started streaming, like I have an app called Presence Light, which is a desktop client, WPF app on the .NET side, and it runs on people's machines, like your machine or my machine or some person in another part of the world's machine. And you can and that app is actually set up with App Insight. So I can actually get telemetry for the apps that are running on those people's machines. Like obviously, I'm not collecting PII because it's something that App Insights doesn't do. But I can see things like error messages or performance issues and things like that. So it's not just, I just want to be clear, it's not just web, right? Like you can take advantage of it on, like I mentioned, iOS. You could take advantage of it on desktop apps as well.
nice. And the iOS one is new to me, actually. That's a really interesting scenario there. So have to try and find a use case to try and play with that one, I think.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
mean, it's definitely, it gives you the opportunity to learn new things, right? I think that's the biggest thing to call out, right?
Absolutely. And I think we've obviously been focusing from one angle here of the, I guess, languages and the frameworks that you might be uh, instrumenting and setting up your applications with. But there's also the angle of if you're using Azure services, for example.
Mhm.
Azure Functions always springs to mind here because I just love how Azure Functions integrate with it all. Um, is the ability to directly set up certain resources with App Insights as well. So, you're not necessarily going to get the same level of telemetry and metrics and insights coming out as you would if you instrumented your application yourself. But again, it's a really super quick and easy way to go ahead and just get some of your components set up and wired up to get some insights there as well.
Yeah, like when I talk with people about App Insights, I kind of mentioned the two approaches, right? The if I have the code and if I feel comfortable making changes to the code, which is what I just showed in that demo,
Yep.
or if I don't have the code or I don't feel comfortable making changes to the code, right? Like I mentioned app service as an example, or just the idea of just having a Windows box that you can run a PowerShell script on and it'll instrument your code for you. And it's one of those things where It depends on the level of detail that you want to get. Obviously, fully instrumenting your code, like I just showed, will get you the best bang for your buck, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that you still can't take advantage of App Insights and Azure Monitor in general. If you go down the path of just kind of lighting up these different services, right? Like App Service has a great extension for App Insights. It's basically like just click a button and follow a wizard. You mentioned Kubernetes. Kubernetes has a very similar approach. And it's just one of those things where it gives you more and more flexibility with, maybe I want to collect telemetry for this app, but I don't want to go through all the process of, cloning down the repo, making some changes to it and then committing it back up and going through that whole DevOps train. Maybe I just want, hey, maybe I have an app in development that I want to test out if I want to use App Insights. You easily just go through that step and then you have it. And if you see there's value in there, you can go down to that next step of kind of getting more detail and instrumenting it, more manually.
Absolutely. And I think you've got it up on the screen here, and maybe we can dig into it a bit, is kind of the live metric side of things as well, right? Because it's not just about, hey, what happened retrospectively, but for example, right, obviously there's been this kind of global pandemic going on right now, and there's, potentially scenarios where, imagine if you had like an application which was relating to tracing and testing people's test results, for example, and seeing big volumes. If you're doing that kind of load test scenario, and maybe you're developing an app like that, you'd want to understand, hey, are we getting loads of requests failing, rather than having to wait for all of the test results to come in. You want to be able to get a live view of what's going on there. And I think that's another great benefit of App Insights here, is that ability to look at live metrics as well, right?
Yeah, so it's, I hinted at it a little bit earlier, right? So once you actually instrument your app, right? Once it's actually starting to collect telemetry and send it into Azure, what does that look like after that event has happened? Like, just take an example. Like, you have application insights instrumented on an application, and somebody's using your app, and then an exception occurs. So what happens at that point in time? So, what happens is the App Insights SDK, it collects all of that information, and it makes a REST call up to the Azure App Insights service. And what happens is then it sends it through a pipeline that looks at that data, analyzes that data, runs some AI and ML things on it, and then it exposes that data via a similar screen that you see here, where it gives you this kind of breakdown of what's going on with your app over a course of a particular time, right? And this is the overview page of the App Insights resource blade in Azure. And you can do things, that are kind of cool, right? Like you mentioned, one of the things is like you can look at, all the different resources that your app is consuming, right? So this example right here. So I built a URL shortener. Well, I didn't build it. I stole the idea from a friend of mine, Jeremy Lickness, and then I kind of made some modifications to fit my needs. But basically what this app is whenever I post something to Twitter or LinkedIn, it has a short URL. So like isaacl.dev/some, vanity thing. And, I'm tracking all of this using, Cosmos DB, and I'm using Azure Queues and stuff. Basically, it's just a way for me to get an understanding of what kind of links people are clicking. But I can easily see real quick, like looking at this application map, like these are all the components in Azure that this particular service is doing. This is an Azure function, for instance, right? The actual instances. So as you can see here, it's hitting Cosmos DB, it's hitting a queue and Azure Table Storage and so forth, right? If I actually go into live metrics here, I can actually see in real time when people actually click on an individual thing. So right now, nobody's clicked on anything, right? So that's kind of sad for me. But if I can go here, I'm going to cheat. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at my Twitter profile and look at what I've posted recently, right? So here's this how to expose .assembly version, right? So if I click on that, that's going to take me to some site, right? But then if I come back over here, I have a request was hit. So it shows me some sample telemetry here. So, and I see that there's an incoming request came in. It shows me the server ID for that particular, where the Azure function was living. And it shows you some really, really interesting stuff there, right? So if you had an app that was very, very chatty, it was doing a lot of stuff like this, all of these would be lit up. To the extent, I think I actually have an example of that if you want to give me 1 second to pull it up.
Sure.
Let Where is that? So this is it's Contoso Hotels. I don't know if you heard about this, Chris, but this is one of our internal resources that Microsoft uses to showcase the power of App Insights. So as you can see here in the last hour, there's been almost 5,000 failed requests and the server response time and all that great stuff. So if I click in live metrics, this will actually be substantially more filled out, right? So things will start to come in here pretty quickly, right? So there's 6 servers that are aligned to it, and as you can see, boom, like look at all this stuff coming through. And over the last 60 seconds, I can see my incoming requests in real time. So that's super valuable, right? Being able to see like really quickly at a glance, like what my app's doing, what's the usage of it, what my failure rates are for particular endpoints, and being able to drill into all that data. So that's super, super cool.
Absolutely. And I can imagine this kind of view being on one of those operation centers kind of screens,
Sure.
right? And just being able to see at a glance how we're doing in terms of requests coming in, and as you say, failure rate and all these things as well. So a lot of great information there, just easily accessible.
Yeah, and this is like tip of the iceberg stuff, right? Like this is the things that like, oh, okay, these are like low-hanging fruits that you can take advantage of without really doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
But and if you want to continue to dive more and more, you can do things like take a look at the failures, right? Like then you can see like, oh, these are like all the exceptions my app has generated in the last 24 hours. So there's been some 413s, some 500s. I can click on these exceptions and I can actually see, let me just start to minimize some stuff because things start to get a bit wonky after a bit. You can click on any of these individual exceptions and then it'll show you like end-to-end transaction details for these particular things, right? So, in this particular sense, it's just an exception through, and you can actually do things like create work items for that particular exception. You can open up a debug snapshot. We can talk about snapshots if you like as well, but you can also do something as simple as just click this just my code button. Mm-hmm. It tells you like the line number of where the exception occurred in your code, right? I mean, that's like from a developer standpoint, like how long is it taking you to get to that?
Yeah.
Right. Whenever I talk about App Insights and I show this little piece, like people get super excited because people have been there, right? You've been there as a developer in the past. I've been there as a developer in the past where it's, sometimes you have the luxury of being able to take a look very, very quickly what's going on. And then other times it takes hours just to get to that line.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's one of those things where, again, just as you continue to drill down deeper and deeper, you get all these sort of rich pieces of information that can make your life easier as a developer. Yeah. And, you can work with your ops partners and your IT pro partners to be able to, bring great value to the business.
Absolutely. And I think one other thing I really want to pull out here as well, because I think we've implied some of it, what we've been looking at here, but just for anyone listening in who hasn't quite grasped some of it as well, all of those insights, all of those pieces of information, whether it's logs, whether it's metrics, all these different things, application insights is now building upon the same concepts with Azure Monitor. So things like log analytics workspaces and all these other things we might be familiar with. So we can also do all of the things that we could do with those as well. So going into logs and being able to start writing our custo queries to go and, put our own dashboards together of things that we're interested in, filter in certain charts or graphs or queries or whatnot as well. So all of that benefit we get. And I think to your point about we've been there as developers, trying to understand the logs. How often have we had to go and get the logs by SSHing onto a machine and, scooping the logs up and understanding, right, hold on, it's not on this instance. I need to jump onto another instance here and go and figure it out. Whereas the beauty of App Insights is you don't do any of that. It is all scooped up into this central workspace where you can go and see all of those logs from one pane of glass, and it makes it super, super easy there then.
Yeah, like you bring up a really, really strong point there, right? There's like these different, it's like an onion, like everything's like an onion, right? Like there's these different layers of complexity, right? Like that top layer is, maybe this overview page where it shows you some really, really, high level things. And maybe it's live metrics where you can take a look at what's going on right now. And then you drill down a little bit into failures, right? Like if I click into failures here, one thing that I didn't call out, but, we can talk about real quick is that you can actually take these graphs and you can view them with the logs. So like let's just look at the requests all the failed requests. So you click on that, and then it takes you over to a log analytics screen that has the actual query that built out that particular table available for you right there. And you can actually make modifications to this if you want. Or if you want to do something, you could build a chart from it like that. Like I always joke when I do these talks about App Insights, is like, how long did it take you to like get a chart that looked like this, right?
Yep.
Like you'd have to like, build some query, and then you would have to go and hand that off to like a data designer and say, hey, like, can you take this query and make it into a chart? And they would say, okay, it'll take 4 to 6 weeks, right? Because they have a backlog. And it's as simple as you can take a look at the results. You can look at the chart. You can actually change the type of chart if you want. You can change the chart formatting here. Like if I don't want it to be a static column anymore, maybe I want it to be a pie graph, like boom. And then it's like, oh, that's super valuable, but I don't want to go here to be able to get this. You can actually then do something like, where is that? You can share this.
Yep.
You can share this information here to the community. And where is that? There used to be a button here that allows you to export this to Power BI. I'm guessing it just got moved somewhere.
Just in the middle of the screen there, actually on the top there.
Oh, export. Yeah. So you can export to Power BI, right? You can export the M query, right? So like, it's one of those things where like not everybody's going to go into the Azure portal and go through all this rigmarole to do these things, right? Like maybe you have a chief marketing officer or somebody who, a project manager for your particular program. Maybe they just want to see a bunch of graphs and numbers, right? And you can build them easily a Power BI report just with all these exports to get them that, like you said, single pane of glass. Yeah. Or you can do things like you can take this and you can pin this stuff to your dashboard in the Azure portal. Absolutely. So like if you have a particular workflow, it's like, okay, every morning I need to go in and I need to check this particular things. You can easily create a dashboard with all these little metrics and graphs on them, and it'll just easily take your processes was a bit more manual and step by step and make it a bit, like you said, single pane of glass and visible across your day.
Absolutely. And I think everything, again, just to be clear for anyone listening in, everything that we've really shown so far is effectively out of the box App Insights or Azure Monitor functionality that you get as a benefit of using App Insights. We haven't really talked about things like those custom traces and those custom events that you might actually set up inside your application. We probably won't touch on that, I guess, today, but yeah, everything there is just vanilla effectively.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, let's just take an example like this, right? Like you have a VM, an Azure virtual machine that runs in Azure, right? You have Azure Monitor plugged into that to make sure that, your server, like the resources of your server are strong, and your server and the operating system is resilient and things like that, right? You can then go one step further and say, okay, well, it looks like my CPU is spiking at particular times during the day for this particular VM. Why is that? You can then go into Azure Monitor and it will direct you to the App Insights resource if you have it lit up for this particular application. And it'll show you, okay, well, it looks like, between 3 and 4, you have 10x users than when you typically do during the day. So it's an opportunity for you to maybe increase the size of your VM or maybe go to an approach that's a bit more scalable, right? Like these are things that in the past, like you would just hope and pray. They're like, okay, well, maybe we just throw RAM or at the situation, or maybe we add more CPU power to these VMs and not really understand why these things are occurring.
Yeah.
But now you have the ability to like look and see like, oh, like traffic to this particular thing has increased tenfold, during this particular time slot of the day or this time slot of the year, like, for instance, like Black Friday or something like that in the retail space. You have this ability to collect all of these insights that allow you to better build your apps for resiliency and scalability, which is super important in a cloud native world.
Absolutely. And there's a really great point in there as well, which is you no longer have to figure out which haystack do you need to go and look in, because all of those logs, all of that information is now in one place, whether it is, the metrics of CPU, RAM or whatnot of the underlying machine, or whether it's those requests and that information there then that is the application layer. And one of the common things I have discussions with organizations as they're moving into cloud is, hey, we can take a look at our CPU and we can see that the CPU is running at 95%. We obviously need to go ahead and kind of scale out that application or scale it up, and because that's really high. And in my response, I kind of go, well, actually, do you? Because surely that is a really well sized application and workload for what you're running. If you're running at 95% and the application's running as expected, well, actually, you've done an awesome job at right sizing the infrastructure to go and run that application. If you're running at 95, 99% CPU and you're getting a ton of exceptions because your application's spiraling, that's a different story. But then it's an application problem, right? So it just changes the discussion, changes the game, I think, for people thinking about that there.
Yeah, and I mean, it just, again, like drilling down into more information, right? Like we talk about performance, we talk about like these sort of things. Like you can actually use App Insights to profile things. So, in this particular instance, I have a service that I want to profile. Like, okay, so when am I seeing spiking? And it'll actually go through and show you like, millisecond by millisecond thread time activity, right? So like you can take a look and say, okay, well this thing took a second, but most of it was in this unmanaged async time, which it lets you to boil the not boil the ocean, but allows you to drill down and get like really really specific details about what's going on, right? So like Profiler and something like Snapshot Debugger, which I'll talk about just for like a quick second, but Snapshot Debugger allows you to basically capture the point in time of an exception in your application and be able to debug it locally, right? So, this concept of being able to, your application threw an exception and maybe it's challenging to reproduce, right? For whatever reason, you have the opportunity to take that particular snapshot of that exception, download it to your machine, open it in Visual Studio, and it'll actually extract all of the telemetry and all the information that's around that exception. It'll actually show you the code base with the actual exception being thrown, right? And you don't need the code locally on your machine to be able to take advantage of that. So again, like super, super impactful for when you want to triage things or get a better understanding of, different performance degradations or exception faults and things like that. So it's super, super cool.
Awesome. Excellent. No, I mean,
Yeah.
I was already a fan of App Insights before we talked, but again, the energy, the enthusiasm, and everything we talked about there, just, I can see the passion there and why, more importantly, there is that passion there as well. So love it. And I think call to action for anyone listening in here is if you're not using anything to go and, monitor your applications and get that telemetry and that insight, why not start with App Insights and get that going really quickly? It's a nice, easy way of understanding what's going on there in the application.
Yeah, and and I'll just continue. Like I said, I get very, very enthusiastic about this because I said it's my favorite service inside of Azure, right? And I'm not lying. I think it's super, super valuable because it gives you all these different slices of information from a particular angle, right? Because all the data is the same, right? Like, so you send like 10 requests or 10, metrics or 10 traces or whatever, and then App Insights, it uses all this artificial intelligence to craft a story from different outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So like you can take a look at, user funnels where you can say like, okay, so the homepage of this particular app, let's take a look and it'll show you if you do these individual steps. This is probably not going to work because I haven't actually gone through this scenario yet. Whatever, go to classic view. Is this the one that I want to see? Maybe not. Anyway, I don't remember for this particular scenario, I don't know what I'm trying to showcase, but I'm just trying to there's different ways to slice a particular thing. So let's select an event, for instance. So I want to be able to see all the page views of the home page, right? So I'm going to then create a graph for that. And it'll show you like the session started, the home page was hit, and the session ended, right? So you can actually track users as they go throughout your application. Like this is a very simple scenario, right? People coming to the home page and then leaving. But you can get a really good understanding of like, okay, well, 50% of my traffic is just this. Like that's not very valuable for your business, right? And you can build these stories as it pertains to getting an idea of what your users are doing. So that's super, super impactful. It's like, oh, like I mentioned earlier, like, oh, maybe you have a bad user experience situation where people are, they're having a hard time finding things. this allows you to be able to, like, with numbers, say, oh, well, 15% of my traffic is going to this place when it should be like 30 or 40. Like, that's not good.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. And I think back to the point we mentioned earlier about DevOps, it's absolutely bringing in that continuous learning mindset, because
Hmm.
if you've got that particular problem where you're seeing a lower percentage of conversion, I guess, effectively there than what you were expecting, then that's something you can easily go, you know what, next sprint, we're not focusing on that feature. We're not focusing on those bugs, for example, or whatnot, because actually the most important thing right now is our end-to-end user flow is broken and users aren't getting the value that we as a business expect to be delivering. And it helps you then have those very data-driven uh, prioritizations then of that backlog, and how you go and look at that development effort that you want to go and move forwards with as well. So makes complete sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that's really important to call out, since full disclosure, Chris and I both work at Microsoft. We both love Azure. Um, I want to just briefly talk about, like, okay, this is great, Isaac and Chris. Like, this is super, super impactful. I'm thinking about using it or playing around with it. Like, what is it going to cost me?
Mm.
Right? I think that's really, really an important thing to call out, is that, like, application insights is a fairly cost-effective solution until you have an app that uses a lot of telemetry.
Yeah.
Right? So one thing to call out that's really, really important is that the pricing for it. Let me just see if I can get you. So users get 5 GB of data ingress a month for free. So 5 GB of compressed JSON for free per month. And if you need more than that, it's $2.30 per additional gigabyte. So obviously, if you have a small app and you're testing it and you're playing around with it, it's going to be almost zero for you, or zero or near zero. And as you add it to production workloads, it will accrue money. Like, you will have to pay for it. It's not something that's free inside of Azure. It's free to try and it's free to use it at its smaller scale. But if you're going to, say, add it to your very, very large retail application that you have, millions of transactions a day or millions of events a day, like, it will add up. So I just want to be completely clear on that. Is it something that people ask me, and I want to be transparent that there is some cost to it, but to try it out, it's free.
Absolutely, and it's a really valid point. It's something that I see come up quite regularly in the monitoring space in general, and the answer I typically give to that is, don't go in just going, hey, we're going to go and monitor absolutely
Yeah.
everything and figure out, what the problem is we're trying to ask the question to, but know what questions you're trying to ask first, then monitor those pieces, monitor those components, and
Yeah.
gradually build up. Because as Isaac rightly mentioned there, it's based on ingestion, it's based on storage. So obviously, the
Hmm.
more you ingest, the more you store, the more the
Yeah.
cost is going to be. So think about the problems you want to solve, and ultimately then, as more and more of those questions come up of, hey, what is the answer to X or what's the answer to Y, then you can start monitoring for those scenarios then as well.
Sure. And let's just use an example of, like, let's say, for instance, you're at a point where you're using App Insights and you're not happy with the amount of money you're spending on it, but you're getting the value of it, right? So App Insights, like I mentioned, uses all this great machine learning and artificial intelligence to, gather all this rich metrics and rich visualizations. You can do something that's called sampling. So what sampling allows you to do is say, okay, process this data, but don't actually store it.
Yep.
Right? So what that means is that App Insights won't actually store 100% of the telemetry. It'll store maybe 25% or 50%. So you're only paying for that particular amount of data, and you still get the rich telemetry. Because use artificial intelligence, say, okay, you're seeing a lot of these requests that are very, very similar. I'm just going to batch them into one concept. So that's a great way for you to look at opportunities to cut costs, if you have issues with how much you're spending with App Insights, for instance.
Absolutely. I think the final thing maybe that we haven't touched upon with App Insights as well, and I suppose we briefly touched upon it to a degree, is again, it's part of that wider Azure Monitor suite, right? So if you think about
Yeah.
things like alerts and metrics and pinning
Yeah.
to dashboard we showed earlier, for example, but the alerting side of things just works the same way as alerts do in Azure more broadly. You know, you can go ahead, query based upon a certain number of metrics that are coming into your App Insights resource, set a threshold. That threshold could be fixed, it could be dynamic, and then you can go ahead and send that out to a number of different action groups, for example. So whether that is a text message or emailing out to certain users, or going ahead and logging a ticket in your ITSM tool, for example.
Yeah.
Again, you've got all of that full story coming back together of how you can go ahead and operate then that service that you're ultimately running there.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, right? Like, I think as developers and IT pros and ops folks, like, you don't want to have to go out here to get all of your information.
Yep.
So you want to be notified in some capacity, email, text message, phone call if it's urgent or whatever, right? Like, you have the ability to, like a lot of services in Azure, like you said, and Azure Monitor is great at this, is that, being able to detect anomalies and being able to act on those anomalies in a way that makes sense, right? Like, you have this concept in some other Azure services is like auto scaling, right? CPU gets too high, auto scale. You can also, in the same vein, okay, CPU is getting too high, send in a text message to these folks, right? Or send an email to these folks. And it just gives you that ability to be better on top of what's going on with your application. Obviously, it's probably not super great for work-life balance, some particular capacities, but
Yep.
if it's part of your day job that you need to be, maybe you're on call, or maybe a part of your job is responding to these things over the course of time, like, it just makes your life easier because you don't have to go and, go and log into the Azure portal on your phone, or, go to your desk or what have you, right? You can kind of look at all this stuff, like I said, from just checking to make sure you're not getting any alerts.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I guess, we best part of 50 minutes or so here, we've been talking about App Insights. Time flies by when you're having fun, right?
I mean, yeah, I can talk about App Insights all day, my friend, all day.
No, this has been really great. So I guess just wrapping us up here and thinking about everything we've spoken about here, Isaac, in terms of your top tips and your top takeaways in terms of the session, and anyone listening in here, what do you think they would be if you had to summarize?
I mean, I think I want people to take advantage of the power of your applications, right? So whether it be helping you as a developer, better triage exceptions that are occurring, or as an ops person, getting a better understanding of, what our users are doing, and what things that we need to be doing to change the outcomes for some of our users, right? These things are challenging discussions and challenging things that can happen day to day. And, it's one of those things where if you have tools in your tool belt that allow you to be successful, take advantage of them. I mean, when we talked last time about GitHub Actions, right? Like, tools and tool belts, right? Like, I'm not saying that these are the tools that you have to use, but these are tools that I've in my career seen that have made my life easier. So I think that's really important to call. It's all about making everybody's life easier in tech. Because life is hard. Life is hard as it is. Like, your job shouldn't be exceptionally hard when it doesn't have to be. So please take advantage of services, whether it's App Insights, or there's other tools on the market that do these sort of things too. I just happen to work for Microsoft, so I know a lot about App Insights. I've used other tools in the past, and they're great. I just prefer App Insights because it's what I do. But I think it's really important to call out that give yourself the gift of not having to stress in the future.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect way to close there. So, Isaac, thank you again for joining. Really appreciate it. Another great session. So, thank you for coming on the show and giving so much value to folks here. Appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, Chris. Always a pleasure. And enjoy your day. And everybody around the world that's watching and tuning in or seeing this later, like, you enjoy your day as well.
So there we go, folks. Another brilliant session there. Talking all about App Insights, going from the kind of monitoring story more broadly, all the way through diving into some of the nuts and bolts of what is in it for you, how it can be valuable for you. So you know what to do. If you've liked this episode, please hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button as well, and of course the notification bell so you know as soon as there is brand new content available for you to listen to, consume, watch, however you go and consume. And of course, mentioning about however you consume, it's not just about YouTube. There's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and cloudwithchris.com, where you can go ahead, listen to the transcript. Nope. Listen to the audio and read the transcript at the same time as well. And of course, many blogs there for you to go and read as well. So with that, thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next one, thank you for watching. Bye for now.